Hello everybody, and welcome to the first vlog of December 2013. Regular viewers of these vlogs will know that I am something of a Doctor Who fan, but what you may not know is that I'm also a bit of a Star Trek fan as well. And I wanted to talk to you this evening about basically the TV series that make up the franchise and reveal to you which one of them is in fact my favourite and why. Now, I can't talk about Star Trek really without talking about the original series, because you know that is where it all began. And my favourite thing about the original series, I have to say, is the character of James T. Kirk himself, the iconic starship captain, because William Shatner manages to blend boyishness, charm, heroism, and just a sense of almost a slight rebelliousness is really quite wonderful, as well as the fact that he's a total womanizer. How many planets did Kirk go to, honestly, where he decided he'd have a bit of a try at chatting up one of the female aliens? Unfortunately, they nearly always fell for him. I suppose you would, wouldn't you? Really, a dashing starship captain comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm from Earth. Would you like to see my home planet?" Okay, I'm sure that's a really dodgy pick-up line, but I'm just going to leave it at that, I think. Anyway, moving swiftly on to the Next Generation, because really, I haven't seen a great deal of the original series, but the Next Generation is really my Star Trek I grew up with, if you like. And there are several things I love about the Next Generation. One of them is, in fact, again, the Captain. Captain Picard, played rather magnificently by Patrick Stewart, who manages to inject a real sense of gravitas into the character. It's quite wonderful, because he's a Shakespearean actor, and he's a really very good Shakespearean actor. So, you know, he's got this wonderful power about the way he delivers the part, but what's good is that there's a lot of comedy in him as well, and it's not just in Picard, it's in the whole of the series. And you've got, you know, characters like Worf, who's this big bulky Klingon character you wouldn't want to meet on a dark night carrying his bat'leth. However, despite that, there are some fantastic scenes between Picard, Worf and all the rest of the gang where, you know, even the big alien mighty characters that basically look a bit silly, I don't mind. It's just brilliant. Of course, Data is an interesting addition to the Star Trek canon, and it is the Next Generation that brought him in. And Data represents that grey area between where technology ends and independent life really begins. And it's something which I think we're getting closer and closer and closer to. There may well come a time when there is in actual fact a real Commander Data character out there. You could go out in the street and meet an android, quite literally. And so Data was really ahead of his time, I think. But you could say that Gene Roddenberry was as well, because creating a Star Trek universe where hatred and war and all those sorts of things have effectively been obliterated, you know, at least among the humans, is a really is a very hopeful, very visionary view of the future. And I honestly hope it's one that actually comes to fruition as well. I really do. At least in some measure, because it would be good to think that all of the inspirational storylines and really fantastic storytelling that the Next Generation really picked up on from the original series could in some way sort of infect, in a good way, you know, the world that still enjoys them to this day. Now, I have to mention Q at this point, because Q is one of my favourite ever Star Trek characters, partly because he has so little regard for the crew of the Enterprise. When Q comes along, you know it's going to be a laugh. Q just loves it. What I like about Q is he can go like that. Not like that, but like that. Oh, maybe like that as well, or you never know, he can do anything. And then suddenly the crew of the Enterprise are, you know, in Sherwood Forest or some other far-flung part of the galaxy. He was once described by Jonathan Frakes, who played Riker, as the emotional thermometer of the series. Now, I think that's really interesting, because it's obvious that the Next Generation had to go dark sometimes. You know, like with the Borg storyline where Captain Picard becomes a Borg, and you have all those slaughtered starships, and it's really big, dramatic stuff. But then you've got those moments when Q comes and just reminds you that Star Trek is basically supposed to be fun as well. And, you know, they mix the two together so brilliantly. Moving on, beyond the Next Generation, to Star Trek Voyager. Now, Voyager, for a long time, I was really, really hooked on, and I still am pretty much. I think it's a good series. What makes Voyager different, though, for me, is that it's a lot more cinematic in the style that it's produced. And of course it has a long, overarching storyline. Now at times it strains a little bit on that leash, but it's also the only series with a female starship captain, played par excellence, I have to say, by Kate Mulgrew, who manages to give, and well, doesn't just manage to, I mean, she excels in the part of Janeway, Captain Janeway of the USS Voyager, you know, facing off the Borg and heaven only knows how many other unpleasant enemies in a far-flung part of the galaxy, you know, on a something like 70-odd year journey to get back home. And although Voyager can be a little bit sort of repetitive sometimes, in that, you know, you often get storylines that seem to be fairly similar to what came before, you have to give it credit for going literally where no man has ever gone before, even more so than the original series. You know, because what Voyager managed to do is to present the importance, I think, of, and this is going to sound really corny, but bear with me on this, the importance of like friends and family and having a little community. Because basically the Voyager crew is an isolated bit of the Federation in a basically hostile region of space that they have never been to before. It's all uncharted. So everything that happens to them requires them to pull together all the time. And basically, the abiding memory I have of Voyager is the ship is forever running out of power sources, and they're always off to some asteroid belt to get more deuterium or some other kind of fancy made-up chemical substance for the warp drive. But anyway, good old Janeway, because one of the main features of Voyager is ultimately the Borg. The Borg feature probably more in Voyager than any other any other Star Trek series in the whole franchise. And they're even involved in getting Voyager home. And it's, I have to say there's one other thing as well. Voyager and time travel. What is it with Voyager and time travel? There's at least 3 or 4 stories, I think, where time travel plays a part. They just can't help it, can they? Going back into the past, even when they don't mean to. As Janeway points out at one point, oh, time travel gives me such a headache. Now, I'm nearly at my favourite. Almost, but not quite, because I now want to talk about Enterprise. Enterprise is, I think, the underdog of the Star Trek TV series. Enterprise was actually really good, because it's hard, actually, to do a sequel, but it's even more difficult to do a prequel. And Scott Bakula, who is already brilliant, in my opinion, because of his portrayal of Sam Beckett in Quantum Leap, you know, and the rest of the crew, very sort of mixed nationality crew. I mean, like British people, well, Star Trek's always had mixed nationality crews, hasn't it? That's the point, really. It was always a good show like that. Brought lots and lots of people together. Symbolic, of course, of the universe coming together. But you know, beside that, you've got Captain Archer, the captain of the first Warp 5 capable starship. If I can get my facts right, and. What Enterprise basically does is, I think, in my opinion, is it tries to kindle the spirit of the original series, but, you know, to a modern audience. And largely speaking, it does succeed. Probably the best season of the show, in my opinion, is the 3rd one, the Xindi War, where, I'm not going to spoil it too much, because I know if you've not seen it, you really should see it. It's really not that bad at all. Honestly, it really isn't. It's good. Ignore what you've heard about Enterprise if you heard bad things, because it really isn't that bad. But basically, Earth is very nearly destroyed by a rather nasty xenophobic race called the Xindi. And the Enterprise, true to form, is sent off into a region known as the Delphic Expanse. Delphic Expanse? That doesn't sound right. It's an expanse of some sort. There are lots of expanses in the Star Trek universe, aren't there, really? Where, you know, they basically hunt the Xindi down, and in a lot of very big battle scenes, actually, just about managed to save the day. But the method and the how and the why and the wherefore, I'm not going to go into. One thing I will say about Enterprise, though, is it's a shame that they very nearly didn't make the 4th season. And as a result, it ended up having to be funded by fans, because although that, of course, in itself is brilliant, fans, clubbing together to say, no, don't take this show off the air, do make another series. And they did, but the thing is, what they did to do, in order to fit the budget, because they had less money, unfortunately, was that they had to basically do 4 overarching, excuse the pun, storylines, or 3 or 4 of them, maybe 4 or 5 actually, and it's a little bit slower, a little bit clunkier. I prefer, if I'm honest, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd seasons of the show. And it's the only Star Trek series to have a song as its opening track, Faith of the Heart, sung by Russell Watson. Now, a lot of people have said it's a bit pants, that opening title song, which is a bit unfair, because it's all about the aspirations of travelling into space and, realising your dreams. But I think, and if you know the show, you'll know what I mean. I think they should have used the end theme, Archer's theme, and so on, as the opening theme and the end theme, because it's a lot more Trekky. But I had to tell you what, though, the last ever episode of Enterprise genuinely gets me emotionally every time, especially the very last moment, where it's, I'm not going to give too much away, but you have a sort of montage of old Enterprise, well, NX-05, whatever it's called, the Enterprise version of the Enterprise becoming the Kirk Enterprise, becoming the Picard Enterprise, and then that infamous, famous speech going where no man has gone before. Bring on the credits. And it's a proper emotional moment. Genuinely, it really is. And I'm not just saying it. There is something very powerful about those words, isn't there? Oh, we're going to go boldly where no man has gone before. And we're doing it, aren't we? We're sending probes to Mars, off to the furthest extremes of the solar system. Pretty soon we will be travelling to other planets. And putting men on the surface of Mars and even in orbit of distant stars. It isn't really that far off, not when you think about it. Now, this of course brings me to my favourite Star Trek series, and if you've been following along, you may realise that is, in fact, Deep Space Nine. Got to tell you something though, I never used to like Deep Space Nine. When I was younger, I genuinely thought it was quite boring, because not a lot seemed to happen. And I guess I know why. It's because it's not one of those big starships travelling through space, shooting at other ships with lots of made-up technological gobbledygook and things like that happening generally. It's not like that. It's not like Voyager, and it's not like The Next Generation. But what it is, I now realise, is one of the best pieces of TV drama ever. What makes it really good, though, for me, is the depth of character drama that you actually get. Gene Roddenberry created a universe in which pretty much everyone got on with everyone, but what makes Deep Space Nine special is that not everyone does get on with everyone. If you know the series, you'll know Quark, the Ferengi bartender, and the station security chief, Odo, the shapeshifter. Basically, they hate each other's guts. Or more accurately, Odo hates and distrusts Quark, and Quark distrusts pretty much everybody. And there's a sort of similar theme like that going all the way through. And a lot of the time in Voyager and Next Gen, you don't get that much animosity. But what it does do for Deep Space Nine is give it a tremendous depth and believability. And, having said that there isn't all that much action in the series, there is. It's just I haven't got to it yet, because I have to tell you, I'm now watching Deep Space Nine from start to finish, and it is just incredibly gripping stuff. It's all about alien politics, which on the surface might sound a bit dull, but it's presented in such a way as to give all the kind of moral issues and the the sort of the wars and the fallout from all the war and the hatred and so on, that's really quite obvious in some of the episodes. It gives all that real world meaning, if you see what I mean. The show effectively mirrors all the things that we really don't like to talk or think about very much, but in a way that is really quite accessible and as I say, completely believable. Plus, I've got to be honest, Deep Space Nine has the most beautiful opening theme title music of any of the Star Trek shows, bar none. It is absolutely beautiful. I mean, I sometimes, when I'm watching it, I will actually close my eyes during the opening titles, because it's like the best piece of classical music. I know it's not really, it wasn't written in the 18th century or what have you, but it's just beautiful. And I know what it's meant to highlight, and does, I think, do very well, is the loneliness of the station, this uncharted region of space, far, far away from anything, and anyone for that matter. So, and there they all are on the edge of the last frontier, basically braving the unknown, and that's why the show works. Now, interesting question. What happens next? Because, of course, very, very successful, the last 2 Star Trek films, Chris Pine and his crew. So here's the interesting question, I think. Are we on the road to a new Star Trek TV series featuring Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto and company in the new Enterprise, and ultimately the new parallel universe that's been created, in which, as I'm sure you know if you've seen both films, Vulcan has been destroyed? I don't know, is the answer, quite honestly. I guess only time will tell. But I think it's a bit like Doctor Who. It'll brew and it'll brew and it'll brew, and at some point someone is going to say, this needs to come back to television right now. And someone is going to get together a group of like-minded people who are ballywell going to do it. So, and I hope that happens. But anyway, thank you for watching. And wherever you go, whatever you do for the next week, go boldly.